When I came out of seminary and went to Ohio to serve my first church as a pastor, there was a regular Bible study that had been going on there for many years. It was a daytime Bible study and was attended by many seniors who were members of that church, and when I arrived there, the majority of the church was near or in retirement, so it was always a pretty big group. And I knew coming in, because it was in the job description, that it was part of my job to go to this Bible study and participate in the Bible study. Well, that was okay with me because I was fresh out of seminary and I was something of an expert on the Bible. And I was also very excited to share my knowledge about biblical scholarship because it had personally been incredibly important to me. I mean, it was because of being introduced to biblical scholarship that I decided in college and in graduate school at Penn State that I decided to go to seminary. It was just, for me, it was just a wow moment, one after another, reading biblical scholarship. And so I really wanted to share that with others. So I came loaded for bear with my knowledge of biblical scholarship to this Bible study, which was attended by this fairly large group of seniors. It didn't quite work out the way I expected it. The way the Bible study would work is that the passage for the day would be read, and then people would have an opportunity to respond to the passage with their own reactions. And so we would go around and someone would say, well, this is what I hear. And this is what I think. And this is what it means to me. And I would listen and I would grow somewhat impatient. And finally, when it became my turn, I would say, no, this is what the passage means. Let me tell you about the context. And I probably said, let me tell you about the Sitzenleben, which is this fancy German term that I learned in seminary about the setting in life of the passage. And I would launch into an explanation of the setting of the passage and the different theories about who actually wrote the passage. Did the person whose name attached to it really write the passage? I would suggest perhaps not. And so on. And what I would find is that my little lecture would inevitably be greeted with silence and smiles. And they were wonderful people. And then after a few moments, someone would say, well, this is what I hear. And then they would go on around. It took me a while. It took me several years at least to come to terms with what was happening here and to begin to actually learn something from it. For a while, I was confident that they would eventually come to see the value of what I brought. And then I grew increasingly frustrated, and I think honestly, as I think back on it, I went through something like the stages of grief. But 8 years later, as I left that church, I was still doing Bible study with that group, a different group, because I had buried a lot of them over the years, but there were others. But I eventually left behind my notes, didn't even bother to bring them, and I was able to just enjoy being there with those people. I did not, however, leave behind my knowledge or my excitement for the scholarship I had learned about and still was avidly consuming. But I had begun to learn over the course of my time there the wisdom of Emily Dickinson's poem, "Tell the truth, but tell it slant." I think the best learning almost always happens indirectly, not directly. And when I talk about learning, I'm talking about learning that touches the heart. Learning that brings about inner change that leads to outward behavior. We all experience lots of learning that isn't like that. I mean, most of us go through school, and much of the learning we experience in school is more, something is told to us, we memorize it, we spit it back, we learn it for a while. And sometimes we welcome the teaching of those who bring their expertise and we welcome that different style. I mean, for me, it's like the difference, though, depends on whether we already agree with that person and their perspective or whether we don't. And I think about, if I were to find myself in a room where Jerry Falwell was preaching and telling me what the Bible was all about, I think I would feel as if I was being lectured to or preached at in an unwelcome way. Whereas I would sit down and listen to Shelby Spong, the bishop, and I would say, as he's lecturing, and he lectures, I'd say, yes, 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 because I already agree with him. But I'm talking about a different kind of learning here, one that intentionally explores the deeper issues of our lives, faith and hope, fear and despair, love and hate. This is the primary kind of learning that we do here together, I think. And I think it calls for a different kind of teaching. Teaching on the slant. One of the wonderful things about Scripture stories is that they are told by storytellers who already knew that. Much of the Bible is narrative. It's storytelling. It isn't lecture. There's very little commandments. I mean, there's 10 commandments. There's actually a few more than that. But even the commandments are couched in a larger narrative. And if you don't read the narrative, then you don't really understand what difference the commandments make. One of the sad things, however, about these same stories is that so many preachers talk about them as if God did dictate them directly, and that God also gave the preacher the one true and only explanation of each passage. This is what God said, this is what it means, and that's the end of the discussion. If you already share that preacher's viewpoint, then it may not feel like a conversation stopper, but it is a conversation stopper. The parables of Jesus, for instance, speak metaphorically and imaginatively. There is no point. There is no point to the parables. Like, this is the point. There is no one meaning. The parables invite a conversation. They invite reflection. They invite, this is what I hear. This is what I think. This is what this passage means to me now, but there was a time when I heard it differently. They invite a conversation among people. In the story of the parable of the sower, for example, sowing can be, first I need to say that the parable of the sower is one of those parables that lends itself to a 3-point sermon. I've heard lots of them over the years. And I think that 3-point sermon is completely missing the point of teaching in parables and what parables are all about.